say you're sorry.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. Today we are diving into a concept that is intriguing as it is influential. It's a philosophy that's all about the greater good. It's all about maximizing happiness and minimizing sufferings.
So buckle up, everyone. Let us embark this fascinating journey and explore the ins and outs of utilitarianism, so and how it shapes the world.
It's a compass that guides many of our daily decisions, even if we're not always aware of it. It's utilitarianism.
Hi everyone, my name is Joanima Elepera and I'm going to report on what is utilitarianism. And today I am going to report on what is utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. So, there's a lot of philosophers under utilitarianism philosophy, and one of them is John Stuart Mill. So, John Stuart Mill is an English philosopher, a political economist, and a classical liberal thinker. He lived from 1806 to 1873 and is known for his significant contributions to social theory, political theory, and political economy. So, Mill is particularly known for his ethical theory of utilitarianism and his critique of state and social control. So, in addition to his contributions to philosophy, Mill also influenced the development of liberal feminism and the women's suffrage movement. He advocated for liberal economic and social policies and wrote influential works on economics, philosophy, logic, and women's rights. In summary, Mill's philosophy revolves around the idea of maximizing happiness while respecting individual freedom. He argues that individuals should have the liberty to pursue their own happiness as long as their actions do not harm others. This balance between individual freedom and societal well-being forms the core of his utilitarian philosophy, and it emphasizes the importance of personal liberty in the pursuit of social progress and overall happiness. So, now let us proceed to what is utilitarianism. So, utilitarianism is an ethical theory that suggests that the best action is the one that maximizes overall happiness or well-being. It's based on the principle of the greatest good for the greatest number. This means that, in any given situation, one should choose the action that produces the most positive outcomes and minimizes suffering for the greatest number of people. So basically, it is doing a decision or making a decision for the greatest good for the greatest number. So, utilitarianism revolves around the idea of maximizing happiness while respecting individual freedom as per John Stuart Mill. So, it is about doing an action that would benefit or cause pleasure or happiness for a lot of people. So, in utilitarianism, when we do an action, we should also consider other people's happiness and not just ours for ourselves. Because in utilitarian thought, an action that causes pleasure or happiness or positive outcome, an action that brings or produces a positive outcome is good. And an action that causes pain or suffering is bad. And as a basis of morality, in utilitarianism, is the happiness an action brings, or the usefulness of an action based on the happiness it could contribute or happiness it could produce for a lot of people, for the greatest number of people, or the basis or to simply put, the basis of morality of utilitarianism is on the outcome of the action. So in the philosophy of utilitarianism, we pursue an action because we believe or we know that it will cause happiness. It will help us or it will produce greatest good for a lot of people. And moreover, because as humans, why would we choose something or why would we choose to do this action that would cause pain when we could choose an action that would bring happiness for a lot of people, including ourselves? So to emphasize, the basis of morality in utilitarianism is in the outcome of an action. And when we do an action, we should think first whether that action would cause happiness for a lot of people before doing so, or whether that action would affect or would inflict pain for a lot of people, because again, Utilitarianism is based on the principle of the greatest good for the greatest number. In utilitarianism, we prioritize the greatest good for the greatest number. So I hope you understand that. So let us proceed to the basic and significant features of the ethics of utilitarianism. So therefore, so let's first discuss what is consequentialism. So consequentialism is an ethical theory that asserts that the right action is the one that maximizes overall happiness or utility. In utilitarianism, the morality of an action is determined by its ability to produce the greatest net happiness for the greatest number of people. This means that actions are just based on their consequences, and the goal is to promote the greatest overall well-being. So in consequentialism, what matters is the consequence or the outcome of an action and not the deed itself. In consequentialism, the action we took, the action we did to achieve something, to achieve our goal, is insignificant. Because the basis of morality in consequentialism is in the outcome of an action. So we look at the outcome of the action and not the action itself. Whatever action you do to achieve something that is good, that action will be justified. Because the end in consequentialism, the end justify the means. So if the end result or the consequences of an action are good, this justifies the means or action that we took to achieve the end. So, like consequentialism, utilitarianism plainly disregards the act itself as the basis of morality, because no action in itself can be considered as good or bad apart from its outcome or end, because action does not have intrinsic value in consequentialism. Action is only viewed as a mere instrument to achieve something. It is not an end itself. Consequentialists look at the end or the outcome of an action to judge whether that action, whether the means you took to achieve something is good or bad. So that is in consequentialism. Now, I hope you understand consequentialism, But let us talk again about that later on. So let's proceed to ethical hedonism. So ethical hedonism suggests that the ultimate goal of human actions should be to maximize pleasure or happiness and minimize pain or suffering. In the context of utilitarianism, ethical hedonism emphasizes that the principle maximizing overall happiness or utility is primarily concerned with the pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain. So now let's proceed to ethical hedonism. So ethical hedonism suggests that the ultimate goal of human actions should be to maximize pleasure or happiness and minimize pain or suffering. In the context of utilitarianism, ethical hedonism emphasizes that the principle of maximizing overall happiness or utility is primarily concerned with the pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain. So, the ethical theory which holds that, ethical hedonism is the ethical theory that holds that the supreme end of man consists in the acquisition of pleasure without infringing the right of others. So just like in what I said earlier, an ethical hedonism is where pleasure is good, or the positive outcome happiness is good, and pain is evil. Hence, morality is grounded on the pleasure that an act brings. Because in ethical hedonism, what matters there is the happiness an action brings, So, we should consider the happiness when we took an action. So, we should consider whether that action we're going to do would cause happiness or pain to others, or even for yourself too. Because we should also consider ourselves in utilitarianism and not just others, We also think ourselves, then But of course, if an action would cause happiness only for yourself, then that action would not be good. That would be wrong. But if an action would cause happiness for you and for the people around you, that action is good. So, in ethical hedonism, what morality right? What if an action is morality right if it tends to produce happiness or greatest amount of pleasure for the least amount of pain. Remember the word least and greatest. So produce least amount of pain for the greatest number of people. So to emphasize, no, in ethical hedonism, the basis of morality is the pleasure an act brings. And like hedonism, utilitarianism claims that pain and suffering should be avoided when one is thinking about doing an action. Because right or wrong are dependent on the pleasure or pain that an act will bring or result to. If an act produces pleasure, it is considered right or good. If it results to pain, it is considered wrong or bad. So, now there's third principle, the principle of utility. So, principle of utility is a fundamental concept in utilitarianism, an ethical theory that evaluates the morality of actions based on their consequences. The principle of utility states that the right action is the one that maximizes overall happiness or utility and minimizes pain or suffering for a lot of people. So, the name utilitarianism, no, is from the word utility. In Latin, it is utilis, meaning useful. Sorry for the noise. So let me introduce you to another philosopher. His name is Bentham. So Bentham is one of the founders or the philosophers who made a great contribution to the philosophy of utilitarianism nowadays. So he famously said that nature has placed mankind under the governments of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do as well as to determine what we shall do. So it was also Bentham who coined the phrase principle of utility to denote that the essentially determining element whether an act can be good or right is the utility or usefulness of an action. So again, back to the phrase earlier that I have said. Nature has placed mankind under the governments of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. So pain and pleasure. When doing an action still in utilitarianism, when doing an action, we first think about the consequences an action brings, whether it could cause pain or pleasure, and if it utilitarianism help us decide what action we should do based on those two sovereign masters, according to Bentham, the pain and pleasure. So but also there's a point in utility. Utility means useful, diba? So utility, what is utility useful? What is useful, or what do you mean by useful in the principle of utility in utilitarianism? Or when does our action become useful in utilitarianism? So to answer that, still in Bentham, an action becomes useful when it produces happiness or desirable consequences, not only for oneself but also for others. So, when our action, we do an action and it causes greatest good, or we do an action for the greatest good for the greatest number of people, that action is useful. Because according to Bentham, an action is useful when it produces happiness not only for yourself but also for others, and for a lot of number of people. That is the principle of utility. And to add, no, to make you or to emphasize or to add something to make you easily understand it. The goodness or badness of an action, of a certain action, is based on the consequence and whether it is useful in contributing for a specific purpose for the greatest number of people. Just like what I've said earlier, so just in another form, other phrase, but the same meaning. That is the principle of utility. Now, let's move on to the greatest good for the greatest number. Sorry about that. So, the greatest good for the greatest number. It is a simple and concise way to express a core idea of utilitarianism. This concept encapsulates the utilitarian principle that actions should aim to maximize overall happiness or utility for the greatest number of people. In other words, in a utilitarian framework, the morally right action is the one that produces the most favorable consequences in terms of happiness and well-being for the largest group or possible group of individuals. So, the greatest good for the greatest number, ito sa in the first slide kanina, no? The utilitarianism is based on this principle. So, it suggests that the best action is the one that leads to the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. In this principle, we do an action that would cause happiness, that would produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people, not just for a group, not just for you, for your family, but for a lot of people. We consider the people that would be affected by the actions. We aim to cause or to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. That is in utilitarianism. So those are the 4 basic and significant features in the utilitarianism. No? I hope you understand that, because that is the key concept in utilitarianism. Now, how do we measure pain, or how do we measure pleasure and pain and happiness and unhappiness? So there's now let me move my face. Now, there's Bentham's philosophic calculus. So according to this method, pleasure can be scientifically calculated according to the following 7 criteria of philosophic calculus. So there's duration, intensity, propinquity, extent, certainty, purity, and fecundity. So when you say duration, how long will the pleasure last? How long will the positive outcome, how long will the happiness last? How long will the happiness that an action brings will last? Intensity. How intense is the happiness that an action caused? Propinquity. How near or remote is it? Extent. How widely it covers. So there's this thing now. How widely it covers. How many people it covers, or how many groups it covers. How widely it covers, because the more or the wider the scope or of the affected people of an action that called happiness, the better. Certainty. How probable is it? And purity. How free from pain is it? Because the purer the pleasure, the better. And fecundity. That action you did, that action that you did cause an pleasure, but did that action lead to further pleasure? That is one, or that those 7 are the ways we should do to measure pleasure or pain. Or here, This is sige. The longer the pleasure lasts, the better. The more intense the pleasure lasts, or no. The more intense the pleasure, the better. The nearer, the closer, or more often the pleasure occur, the better. The greatest the number of people who can experience pleasure, the better. The greatest number of people, the extent of how widely it covers, the greatest number of people. So the more certain the pleasure, the better. And the purer the pleasure, the better. And lastly, the greater the possibility that the pleasure that one can derive from an act will be followed by more pleasures, the better. Those are the 7, in the philosophical calculus by Bentham. So the main goal of Bentham in formulating this method is to help individuals as well as lawmakers and legislators decide what ought to be done in any given set or of circumstances. In ethical or moral decision making, Bentham claims that what truly matters in the end is the maximization of pleasure or happiness and the minimization, if not the total eradication, of pain or suffering. No. Let's proceed to the 2 types of pleasure, the quantity and the quality. So when we say quantity, this aspect focuses on maximizing the sheer amount or quantity of pleasure or happiness experienced by individuals or society. Utilitarians, who emphasize quantity, argue that the ethical choice is the one that produces the greatest overall sum of pleasure regardless of the quality of that pleasure. So, utilitarianism suggests that the moral action can be determined by the total amount of pleasure produces for all affected parties. So, it prioritizes actions that result in a larger quantity of pleasure, even if the quality of pleasure may be lower. So, it focuses on the quantity of the pleasure, the sum of the pleasure an action brings. That is the quantity pleasure. Now, let's have the quality pleasure. The quality pleasure is the aspect that focuses on the idea that not all pleasures are equal in terms of their quality or intensity. Some pleasures are more profound, satisfying, or valuable than others. Utilitarians who consider the quality of pleasures argue that it's not just about maximizing the quantity of pleasure, but also about enhancing the quality of the pleasure experience. This perspective can lead to a preference for higher intellectual or moral pleasures over simple physical or fleeting pleasures. So, utilitarians acknowledge that, or utilitarianism acknowledge that not all pleasures are equal in terms of their desirability or worth. Some pleasures may be fulfilling, satisfying, or of higher qualities than others. The moral worth of an action is not solely determined by the quality or the quantity, no, that's not quality. The moral worth of an action is not solely determined by the quantity of pleasure, but also by the quality of pleasure. The quality of pleasure it produces. Actions that result in higher quality pleasure are considered more morally valuable in the quality pleasure. So, pleasure differ not just in amount but also in quality. Now, let's me go. Why is the other slide now? Again, sorry about that. Pleasure differ not just in amount but also in quality. The pleasures of the mind or the spirit are higher than pleasures of the flesh and the body. According to Mill, persons or we should seek the higher pleasure than pursue the lower kind that is associated with mere sensual satisfaction or fulfillment. According to Mill, We should pursue an action that would produce more happiness. No, not more happiness. That would produce quality pleasure or happiness that would have intense pleasure that would, like example, family time, bonding. No matter how short or how small the amount or the quantity of the pleasure it has, the quality of the pleasure it brings, the quality of the happiness it brings is more higher than quantity pleasure. That is one of the example of the quality pleasure, family time. So the ideal situation is to maximize both the quantity and quality of pleasures, no? However, if a choice needs to be made, utilitarianism may prioritize actions that produces the great quantity of pleasure even if the quality is lower, because in utilitarianism the focus is the greatest good for the many. Or no, I think I made a mistake. The focus in utilitarianism is for a many, for a lot of people, not just amount. No matter if the quality of pleasure itself is lower, but it affects a lot of people, the better. That is in utilitarianism. Now, like any other philosophy, it has also strengths and weaknesses, no? So let's discuss about the strengths and weaknesses of utilitarianism. So, utilitarianism, what is the strengths? Let's first have that is strengths of utilitarianism. So utilitarianism focuses on the greater good. In utilitarianism, it emphasizes that the importance of considering the well-being for the majority. Focus on the greatest good, doing an action that would benefit or that would cause the greatest good. That is one of the strengths of the utilitarianism. Next is impartiality. Utilitarianism promotes impartiality by considering the well-being of all individuals equally. Before doing an action in utilitarianism, we consider the well-being of a lot of people, the happiness that would or the feelings of people, the happiness that would affect, or the actions that would bring happiness to a lot of people. We consider their well-being before doing an action. However, there's also weaknesses of utilitarianism. One of them is difficulty in measuring happiness. So determining the overall happiness or well-being resulting from an action can be subjective and challenging. Because there's the quality or the happiness of an action brings to a lot of people varies. Some people, that action that you did is a quality pleasure. It has higher, or it is more valuable pleasure. But however, in others, it is not that valuable. No, just a fleeting pleasure for them. We cannot measure pleasure equally in doing an action. The actions we did, of course, did cause pleasure, but the pleasure it caused is not equal for all the people. For all the people that affected by that action, is not equal. So it is difficult, or not, sometimes it could be equal, but more often it is not. So it is difficult to measure happiness. And thanks to the Bentham's philosophy calculus, we could now measure happiness or pain and actions, or our actions cost. Now, the second one of the weakness of utilitarianism is lack of consideration of intention. So this is what strikes me the most now. Utilitarianism primarily focuses on the consequences of actions rather than the intentions. The intention behind the action. If intention is good and consequences are bad, so what is the action, or what is the action based on the morality of utilitarianism? That action, of course, is bad because that action causes pain, or is the consequence of that action is bad. Therefore, that actions, even if the intention is good, cannot be justified. That action will still be considered wrong because the consequences of an action, of the action you did, is bad. It causes pain or for everyone or for a lot of people. That action is wrong. Of course, if it causes pain in utilitarianism, if that action causes pain, it is bad. No matter what kind, how good your intention is, if an action causes pain, that is bad in utilitarianism. So intentions are insignificant. The means of an action is significant because again, the deed is insignificant. The end is what we consider in utilitarianism. The end justified the means. If the end is bad, the action, the means is bad. If the end is good, the action is justified. So, that is the strength and weaknesses of utilitarianism. Now, let's move on to the act and rule utilitarianism. So, again, there it is mentioned here, the Bentham and Mill, the two philosophers that developed the utilitarianism or made this utilitarianism famous. They are the two philosophers that have had a great impact on utilitarianism, no? So, and in the act utilitarianism, according to Bentham, looks at the consequences of each individual act and calculates utility each time the act is performed. So, in act utilitarianism, evaluates the moral worth of individual actions based on their consequences. According to the act utilitarianism, the right action is the one that produces the greatest amount of overall happiness or utility in a particular situation. It focuses on the immediate consequences of each action and does not rely on pre-established rule. That is in the act utilitarianism. Now let's go on to the rule utilitarianism by Mill. So, the rule utilitarianism looks at the consequences of having everyone follow a particular rule and calculates the overall utility of accepting or rejecting the rule. So, it takes a different approach in the rule utilitarianism takes a different approach, no? It focuses on the general rules rather than specific actions. It argues that moral decision making should be guided by rules or actions or the decisions we do to decide which action we choose should be guided by rules that, when followed, tend to maximize overall happiness or utility. Rules are also based on the principle of utility. No? Again, in the principle of utility, an action becomes useful when it causes or produces great amount of happiness for lots of people. So, rules utilitarianism allows for flexibility in specific situations, but prioritizes adherence to general rules that have proven to be beneficial for society. Let's say example. I am having a dilemma in choosing a decision, and based on the rule utilitarianism, it helped me, or it have guided me to choose an action by following a particular rule that would help me, or that decide which action should I do. But that rule will, again, in the rule utilitarianism, the rule is guided by the principle of utility. So, utility, again, the usefulness of an action, meaning the action would produce happiness for other people. So I do an action. I am going to do an action, and by following the rules that the guiding rule, in the rule utilitarianism, I did an action that tend to maximize overall happiness. That I did an action that brings or produces happiness for a lot of people. In the rule utilitarianism, it helps people decide an action that would produce happiness for a lot of people. So that is in the rule utilitarianism. So I guess that's it. I hope you understand the discussion, no? So before I end, let me leave this quote, this saying by John Stuart Mill, okay? He said, accordingly to John Stuart Mill, he said, it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. It is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. I hope you understand that. Now, life is a complex journey filled with choices. Every day, we stand at the crossroads of decision making where each path leads to different outcomes. Some choices are easy, others are not so much. But imagine if we had a compass, a guiding principle that could help us navigate through these crossroads. That is where utilitarianism comes in. It whispers in our ear, just the path that would bring happiness, just the path that would cause the greatest good for a lot of people. Just the path that would produce pleasure for a lot of people. So, it's a philosophy that challenges us to think beyond ourselves, to consider the ripple effects of our actions to others. So, as we journey through life, let us remember every choice we make, every action we take, has the potential to contribute to a greater good. And in the grand scheme of things, isn't that life all about? Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you understand, and I hope if ever this question, you will reach out to us so that we could answer your questions truthfully and be in our capabilities. Okay. So, that's it. Goodbye, everyone. I hope you learned something today.